Hello, my name is Kaitlyn Nelson. I'm going to be doing my presentation today, but first we're going to do a precautionary check around the room. Alright, now that that's done, my topic is the text-to-film study on the modern political discrepancies within The Handmaid's Tale. And to start off, I'm going to show this collage of different pieces of art that some fans of The Handmaid's Tale have made, and I think it depicts the response from the media and how issues that resonated with people in 1985 still create a passion within people to artistically express their awareness and the warning that this book presents to society and why it was adapted into a film. So, both of these authors slash creators face some individual challenges. Since Atwood published the book in 1985, there were much different circumstances, especially with her audience, is because they were much less understanding and not open to calling out injustice when they were the ones creating it. And it was harder for Atwood to grasp the attention of people because people didn't take her seriously as an author, especially because she was a female author writing on male dominance and certain topics that people were uncomfortable hearing and wouldn't take it as seriously from her. And also, people didn't take it seriously because of the way it's depicted in a dystopian society and how it was put into science fiction, that category, but she seems to want to define it as speculative fiction, which is her taking a topic in society and commenting on it and then putting it into something that we may not see plausible, but it very could well happen, which was difficult for people to swallow and digest. But with Bruce Miller, he has a much more accepting audience and much younger audiences now that will adapt to it and take to it better. And he has to adhere to Margaret's story, but they work very well together, and they have created 3 seasons, and, he gets some artistic abilities to take on for himself to adapt into the series. And it was hard for him as a male to take on this feminist novel and take it on and do it justice, and he kind of had this mentality of who the hell do you think you are getting this job, and he didn't know if he was the right person to do it because of his inability to express some female feelings and some of the things that are touched on in the book, because he didn't want to offend anyone and he didn't want to portray any disinformation to young females out there. Some political issues discussed in the novel are Gilead, which is a parallel to the US government, and it's supposed to be this idea that the US was overtaken by a totalitarian regime, and I think this quote kind of ties it all together. The Republic of Gilead knows no bounds, Gilead is within you. This really depicts how overbearing, and there was no personal space, that any personal right. They were taken over, and the people, and mainly women, were attacked because they were seen as lesser by the people who thought this was better for society. And a major political tool that they used was rape in Gilead. The handmaids had to undergo a ceremony with a commander they were assigned to and their wife, and they would have to be impregnated to repopulate the earth. So having a child wasn't something they were able to have this intimate moment with someone they loved and get to raise a child together. That child, they were forced to have a child and then give it away and then move on to the next home. And the reason they were forced to repopulate the earth is because of the irresponsible treatment of the environment by society before Gilead. And there was toxins thrown into the water where people became infertile because it got into the water supply, and infertility rose, and then fatality numbers rose as well. And this kind of shows a woman's place and a man's place in this society of Gilead, where women are used and as a tool into repopulating the earth, and they really have no purpose but their body. and they couldn't find any, they weren't used for pleasure, they were used for a job. And a man was, you had one thing to do. You were either to become a commander or an eye, and your job was to better Gilead, and make a family. And it was embarrassing, if your family wasn't created fast enough, it was embarrassing to be the only one that couldn't procreate. So some other political issues discussed are the governmental influence, censorship, separation of church and state, personal right, and sexuality. So an example of sexuality that was used in The Handmaid's Tale was gender traitors. This is what they referred to people who referred to themselves in the LGBTQ community. And if you were known as a part of that community before Gilead, you were seen as a gender traitor, and you could be executed in Gilead if you ever tried to pursue someone of the same sex as you. And since they use the Bible as a reason or / scapegoat to everything that they did and the slaughtering that they did to people, so that's when separation of church and state is put into place here, is because Gilead couldn't see the difference between putting aside your personal / religious beliefs and the politics of your life. Some other important issues discussed are the reproductive rights that women necessarily didn't have whatsoever. They had one job to do, which was create, and they didn't really have a choice not to have a child, because if in a certain amount of time they couldn't have a child, they would be seen as barren, and then they would be sent away to labor camps. And this is where there was toxic air and pollution, where people could not breathe, and you would only last there for a certain amount of time, and you would do very rigorous work. And education was another point where only young men were sent to, because they need to be trained to become intellectuals and to help Gilead grow and help their economics and, world trade. And women actually, and young girls, were not taught to read in Gilead, so you lost that right. And they had signs of just bread, so you would learn different signs instead, or pictures and pieces of art, instead of actually getting to read, because they didn't want anyone to, create their own person. Some differences in the show compared to the book is the book provides a more scriptural and gives you more details into everything, but you don't get this visual representation of the story, which is a major advantage to the show, because you're able to have this expansion artistically and connect to audiences everywhere. And the hierarchy within Gilead was the handmaids and the Marthas, which were used by the wives and the commanders, and the eyes were just a tool that the commanders used in society. And to depict this culture, some choices that the crew behind The Handmaid's Tale used was their costuming choices, some choice of music, and casting. So the music used in this show, they had many different iconic songs at the end of each episode that would leave you on a cliffhanger after watching everything that just unfolded. So some examples are, in the first episode, they used Nothing's Gonna Hurt You Baby, or on the third episode, Waiting for Something. They used the titles that meant something to what was happening in the plot. And this quote kind of puts together what the music unfolds for the show. Every episode ends with a musical choice that sums up the show's central themes of despair and hope in equal measure. So here are the different costumes that they had. They had red for handmaids, the wives wore blue-green, commanders were sleek, and they had, a suit and tie to make them look put together. And then the eye actually had a black outfit, like a uniform that didn't stand out. Aunts wore very custom brown outfits to make them seem of authority. Marthas wore very basic gray midwife outfits, and the children of Gilead wore light pink, and young boys would wear light blue and, very put together, some khakis maybe. And this really depicts the different choices and different stances in society in Gilead. What makes this novel significant enough to be adapted is because of the universal connection to audiences. Like Margaret Atwood made The Testaments, which is the sequel to The Handmaid's Tale, which came out this last year. And these are all real events that Atwood keeps finding to create and tell people about to make them aware of what society has done. And there's so much political trauma that people can relate to now because of everything that happens, and there's so many parallels that people can connect to. What makes film resonate with society is that it sparks a resistance in people, and it puts people's lives into perspective and see the parallels within everyone, and maybe call out what they see as wrong and they didn't see before. And that concludes my presentation.